To heal other people, you have to suffer yourself. 7 words. Spoken by an 82-year-old woman in a small, bare room in Rome to the most photographed person on the planet. Diana didn't write them down. She didn't need to. They landed somewhere deeper than paper. They landed in the part of her that had been asking the same question for years, the question she couldn't put into words but couldn't stop carrying. Why me? Why the bulimia? Why the loneliness? Why the marriage that felt like a performance from the very first morning? Why the institution that smiled for the cameras and closed its doors when she needed to come in from the cold? Mother Teresa gave her an answer she hadn't expected. Not a political answer, not a palace answer, a spiritual one. And Diana would carry those 7 words for the remaining 5 years of her life into the AIDS wards, into the landmine fields of Angola, into the dying rooms of Calcutta, and she would use them as the key that finally unlocked the question of who she was supposed to be. This is that story. There's a version of this that the press told at the time. 2 famous women, photographed together, smiling. A princess and a saint. A good headline and nothing more. What that version leaves out is what happened before the cameras were allowed in. It leaves out the 30 minutes in a private room that nobody was present for. It leaves out the chapel, the bare concrete floor, the sound of shoes being removed before entering a holy space. It leaves out what Diana wrote afterward in her own hand, in a letter to her butler, about what she felt when she walked out of that convent and back into the world. Everything in this script comes from documented accounts. The testimony of Mary C. Johnson, a former missionary of charity who was present for the first meeting, Diana's own letter, as preserved by Paul Burrell, Andrew Morton's biography, built on Diana's secret tapes, and the public record of what both women said about each other before they died. Where something can't be verified, I'll tell you. That's the deal on this channel. Before we go further, if this channel has ever shown you a Diana you hadn't seen before, take 1 second and subscribe. This one matters. Let's go back. Because before Diana ever met Mother Teresa, she met Calcutta. February 1992, India. Diana and Charles are on a joint royal tour. 6 days, 2 people, 1 marriage that has been quietly bleeding out for years. The official itinerary reads like a parade: Delhi, Jaipur, Agra, state banquets and silk garlands, and the kind of photographs that end up in archives. It was on this tour, at the Taj Mahal, that Diana sat alone on the bench that would become one of the most replicated images of the 20th century. No Charles beside her. Just a princess, a monument built for love, and 1,000 cameras capturing the distance between them. But there is a moment from that trip that never made the front pages in quite the same way. Diana had asked, specifically and personally, to visit Mother Teresa's home in Calcutta. The missionaries of charity, the place where Mother Teresa had been pulling dying people off the streets for 40 years. Diana wasn't going because it was on the schedule. She was going because she'd wanted to go for a long time, and this trip was the opportunity. Mother Teresa at 82 was ill. She couldn't receive Diana that day. It was a disappointment that Diana was careful not to show in public, because that was the thing she'd been trained to do, absorb disappointment and smile through it. But Diana went anyway. She was given a tour of the convent. She walked through the rooms where the sisters worked. She met the nuns. She saw the sick children they cared for, the ones the rest of the world had looked away from, and she sat with them the way she always sat with people who were suffering, not at a careful, manageable distance, but close, present, like someone who wasn't afraid. And then the sisters did something Diana hadn't expected. They sang to her. Not a performance, not a formality. They sang because they wanted to, because she had come, and coming mattered, and this was how they said thank you. Later, days later, when she was back in England, back in the apartment at Kensington Palace, Diana wrote a letter. She wrote it to Paul Burrell, her butler, the man she called her rock, and she described what she had felt in that convent in a city she hadn't grown up in, among women she'd never met, listening to voices that weren't singing for the cameras. She wrote, "Today, something very profound touched my life. I went to Mother Teresa's home and found the direction I've been searching for all these years. The sisters sang to me. I soared to such heights in my spirit." Read that again. "I found the direction I've been searching for all these years." She was 30 years old. She'd been Princess of Wales for 10 of those years. She had dresses in every colour, palaces in 3 counties, her face on postage stamps in 11 countries. She'd danced with John Travolta at the White House. She'd been photographed in every conceivable pose of glamour and grace. And she had been searching for direction. Quietly, privately, In the part of herself that the camera couldn't reach, she had been searching for the reason the suffering was worth something, the reason her own suffering, the marriage, the loneliness, the years of feeling unseen inside the most visible life in the world, hadn't been wasted. She didn't find the full answer in Calcutta that day. Mother Teresa wasn't there to give it to her. But she found something that pulled her forward. Enough to next shawl enough A working-class district of Rome. A missionaries of charity convent that looks nothing like a palace and everything like a place where the world's noise stops at the door. Diana arrived, Mother Teresa was there. And Mary C. Johnson, a former missionary of charity who was present that day and has spoken about it in detail since, describes what happened next. Mother Teresa led Diana to her private room, just the two of them. No staff, no advisors, no ladies in waiting, no palace press secretary, standing in the corner monitoring the tone. The door closed. They were alone together for nearly 30 minutes. Nobody knows what was said in that room. Johnson has been careful about that. She witnessed the meeting. She did not witness the conversation. What happened between those two women, in that bare, quiet space, belongs to them. But we know what Diana looked like when she came out. And we know what Mother Teresa said to her, because it made it into Andrew Morton's biography, recorded in Diana's own voice on the secret tapes she made in 1991 and 1992. The words Mother Teresa spoke to her that stayed, the words that Diana carried and repeated and returned to. To heal other people, you have to suffer yourself. 7 words that reframed everything. Think about what Diana had been told about her own suffering up until that point. The palace had treated it as an inconvenience. The press had treated it as content. The institution had told her, in 1,000 quiet ways, that her feelings were a problem to be managed, her pain a complication in an otherwise manageable arrangement. And here was a woman who had spent 40 years kneeling beside the dying in Calcutta, a woman who had won the Nobel Peace Prize and turned down the banquet dinner so the money could feed the hungry, a woman who had taken nothing and made it into everything. Here was that woman, telling Diana that the suffering was the point, that it wasn't incidental, that it wasn't punishment, that the wound was the very thing that made it possible to reach inside someone else's wound and mean it. Diana had been asking, in her own way, why she hurt so much, for so long, without anyone who seemed to understand it mattering. Mother Teresa understood it. After the private room, they went to the chapel. Johnson remembers that moment clearly. She says Mother Teresa told her, "Diana and I want to be alone with Jesus," and so the chapel was cleared. The two women went in together. At the door, they removed their shoes. It was the custom of the missionaries of charity, a mark of reverence, of entering holy ground differently than you enter ordinary ground. Diana removed her shoes. She had arrived as a princess. She stood there now as a woman in her socks on a cold stone floor, and she walked in. Johnson recalls the image she couldn't shake afterward. Diana's shiny black pumps, sitting side by side with Mother Teresa's floppy, worn sandals outside the chapel door. 2 pairs of shoes, the whole distance between their lives, sitting on a stone floor. They were inside for a while. When they came out, Johnson says the cameras were waiting. The world wanted its photograph. Mother Teresa and Princess Diana, side by side for the lens. But the photograph that the world got was already the aftermath. The real meeting had happened in the private room, 30 minutes, no witnesses, and 7 words that Diana would never forget. You can trace the shape of Diana's remaining 5 years along the line that Mother Teresa gave her. Before 1992, Diana was already doing charity work. She'd been doing it for years in the way that royal charity work gets done: carefully chosen causes, supervised visits, photographs taken from a respectful distance. She'd broken from that pattern in 1987 when she shook the hand of a dying AIDS patient at London's Middlesex Hospital, barehanded, in front of cameras, in a room that the rest of the establishment wanted no part of. That was instinct. That was Diana before she had a framework. After Rome, she had the framework. She began to understand her own suffering not as something to be hidden or managed or fixed, but as the thing that made her useful. The reason she could walk into an AIDS hospice and not flinch was because she knew what it felt like to be lonely in a crowded room. The reason she could sit beside a child in a cancer ward and actually be present, not perform presence, but be it, was because she'd spent years in a palace feeling like nobody was truly in the room with her. Mother Teresa's words gave her permission to stop apologizing for having been broken, and they pushed her further. The AIDS work deepened. She began visiting the homeless in London herself, privately, without press. She would call ahead, arrange to come, and then come in ordinary clothes without a motorcade. She visited Stoke Mandeville, Great Ormond Street, hospices across the country. She'd sit on the beds, she'd hold hands. She wouldn't shake them, take a photograph and move on. She'd stay. In 1997, 6 months before she died, she went to Angola with the Red Cross and walked through landmine fields. She wore a blast visor and body armor, and walked across ground that had already taken limbs from hundreds of civilians. She knelt beside people who had lost legs. The British government, at that point, was trying to block international landmine legislation. Diana kept going. She kept speaking. The suffering had given her something the palace never could. Credibility. The credibility of someone who had been through things and was still standing, still reaching, still choosing to show up. Mother Teresa had called it. She'd seen it in that first 30 minutes in Rome. She'd looked at a woman the world called lucky, and had understood that lucky is sometimes the most isolating word there is. June 18, 1997. New York City, the South Bronx. Diana was in America for the Christie's auction of her dresses, 79 gowns, proceeds going to AIDS charities and cancer research. The auction would raise more than $3 million. She had come to America to do something useful, and before she left, she made time. She had just come from the White House, from a private meeting with Hillary Clinton, and then her car headed north out of Manhattan, into the Bronx, to a missionaries of charity convent on a street that looked nothing like where princesses usually went. Mother Teresa was in a wheelchair by now. Her heart, her lungs, her kidneys, all of it failing, slowly and stubbornly. She had been confined to that wheelchair for months. And yet, according to the accounts of people who were there, when Diana arrived, Mother Teresa rose. She stood up. Just for this. Just for Diana. They hugged, they kissed, they prayed together. Mother Teresa placed her hands on Diana and blessed her. And then they walked out together, Diana holding the frail nun's arm, steadying her, guiding her down the steps onto the sidewalk of the Bronx. Hand in hand, moving slowly. The people there reported the same thing. That neither woman seemed to be performing anything. That there was no audience in any real sense despite the cameras at a distance. Just 2 women who had built something between them over 5 years, something quiet and genuine, and were spending 40 minutes together in the way that people do when they're both aware, somewhere, that time is running short. They talked about the boys, William and Harry. Diana always talked about the boys. She talked about poverty, about the work, about what more could be done. And then Diana helped Mother Teresa back inside. And she got in her car. And she went back to Manhattan. It was the last time they would ever see each other. 2 months later, on the night of August 30th, 1997, Diana's car went into a tunnel in Paris and didn't come out the same way it went in. Paul Burrell was woken by the phone. By morning, he was moving through Diana's apartment at Kensington Palace in a daze, gathering the things she would need. Not luggage, not dresses, what she would need to be laid beside. There was a rosary in her possession. It had been given to her by Mother Teresa. A small, simple thing. The kind of object that a woman who had taken vows of poverty would give, because it was not about the object. It was about what the object meant. Burrell brought it to Paris. He gave it to Diana's driver, Colin Tebbot. Tebbot gave it to a nurse at the hospital and asked her to place it in Diana's hands. It was still there when Prince Charles arrived, still there when her sisters came, still there when she was brought home. Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales, a Protestant woman from Northamptonshire, was buried in the grounds of Althorpe House holding a rosary given to her by a Catholic nun from Albania who had built her life on a street in Calcutta. Mother Teresa died 5 days later, September 5, 1997. She was 87. She didn't live to attend the funeral. She had already done what she needed to do. Leave her in Rome. February 1992. She's walking out of the chapel. Her shoes are back on. The cameras are somewhere outside, waiting, but they haven't found her yet. There are 30 seconds between the door of that chapel and the door that leads back to the world, and she is in them, alone. She's just spent time in a bare room with a woman who spent 40 years watching people die with nothing, and who called it holy. She's just heard 7 words that rearranged something inside her. She's 30 years old, the marriage is dying, the palace is pulling away. The person she thought she was, the girl in the Spencer family photographs, the girl in the cathedral, the girl on the tea towels, that person has been dissolving for years, quietly, in the dark, and she hasn't known yet what's supposed to come next. Now she knows. Not the details, not the plan, not the landmines of Angola or the AIDS wards or the auction at Christie's or the Bronx on a summer afternoon, with a woman in a wheelchair. She doesn't know any of that yet. She knows the principle. The suffering was not wasted. It was the preparation. Every lonely night in that apartment. Every dinner where the chair across the table was occupied by someone who had stopped seeing her. That was the education. That was the thing that would let her sit beside a dying man and mean it. That would let her kneel on ground that might still kill her. That would let her hold the hands that everyone else was afraid to touch. She had been cracked open. And Mother Teresa told her, in 7 words, that cracked open was where the light got in. She walks out into the Roman afternoon. The cameras find her. She smiles, because she always smiles. But something is different. Something has settled. Something that would hold all the way through the years ahead, all the way through the losses, all the way to a coffin with a rosary in its hands, and a world that had no idea what to do with the size of what it had lost. She found the direction, in a bare room, with a small old woman in worn sandals. On an ordinary Tuesday in Rome, that was the advice she was given. That was the advice she never forgot. And, in the way she spent the rest of her life, in every hand she held and every room she walked into, and every cause she refused to step back from, you can see the proof that she kept it. Thank you for staying with me through this one. I know it wasn't easy. There are stories about Diana that ache because they're about loss. And then there are stories like this one that ache for a different reason, because she found something real, something that held, something that in the end was buried with her. And knowing that, knowing she didn't just suffer, but found the meaning in it, changes what her life looks like when you step back and see the whole shape of it. She wasn't a tragedy. She was someone who was broken and chose what to do with the pieces. That's not the fairy tale, that's better.